Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Cychopsy here, back with another video. And if you guys don't know me, I'm just a guy who does YouTube for fun. And in today's video, I'm going to be helping some of you guys out who maybe wanted to become the Elden Lord, but were never able to finish the game. So today we're going to be going over some of my favorite and best builds. Since the DLC is out now, it is pretty hard. Hopefully these builds can help carry you through it. But let's get right into this. The first build that we're going to be doing is a Bloodhound build. So as you can see here, we're using the Bloodhound Fang as our main weapon. And then in our offhand, we're using the Bloodhound Claw and the Beastman Seal, as well as we're using Blide's Helmet and then the Bloodhound Armor. The armor and weapons are pretty easy to get, but this is pretty much a straight physical build. One of the main things we do is, right before the fight, we buff ourselves with Bloodflame Blade, because it's one of the few incantations that can be used on this special weapon, and it's going to cause extra bleed buildup. And since our weapon already does natural bleed buildup, it definitely helps a lot. And this is pretty much a pure dexterity and strength physical build. You're going to want a decent amount of health and stamina to help you win these fights, and maybe put a little bit into FP as well, just so you can use the Ash of War pretty often. It is a very overpowered Ash of War. As far as talismans go, we're going to be using the Dragon Crest Great Shield to take less physical damage. We're going to be using the Lord of Blood's Exaltation so that we get a power boost whenever we get a blood loss proc. And then also we're going to use the Shard of Alexander, because that's going to boost our Ash of War's damage. And then Millicent's Prothesis, so it's going to give us some extra dexterity, as well as when we start getting consecutive hits, it's going to boost our attack power. This build makes the game honestly easy mode. You just run up to the enemies and you hit L2 and they just melt away. The Ash of War is super good. You can just use the first phase of it, or you can use both attacks to charge back in and hit them with the second strike. As long as you buff yourself with Bloodflame Blade, it does a lot of damage, and you will start to cause bleed buildup very fast, and as soon as you get that bleed buildup, you start getting a power boost from the Lord of Blood's Exaltation. I mean, just watch how I shred through some of these bosses and stagger the hell out of them because we have high strength and dexterity. You can also use the Beastman Seal to use some incantations. You're gonna need it for sure to cast Bloodflame Blade on your sword, as well as another really good one is Swarm of Flies. As you can see, you can really cheese bosses with this, including Melania. I went in there and I just spammed the shit out of her with blood flies in her second phase, and it honestly worked out really well. It doesn't do a ton of damage while it's hitting them, but it staggers them in place, and it causes blood loss buildup. So eventually, after 3, maybe 4 of them, you will get that blood loss proc, and it is huge. As you can see, you can just sit back and just cast it at her. It's kind of slow moving, but it does track right to the enemy. And once it starts hitting them, it does start staggering them a little bit. As you can see, even Melania, who moves around a lot and is very fast, is getting tracked by those swarms of flies. And once they hit her, they're staggering her and causing blood loss buildup. And while she's being staggered by it, it leaves her wide open to be attacked by you or your summons. But on to the next build. So this build is kind of an interesting one. You're going to need kind of a lot of stats to make this viable, but it's basically a lifesteal build. So for the armor, we're using the Royal Remains armor because each piece of that is going to give you a passive health gain. So having all 4 of the pieces on gives you a decent amount of health back per second. As well as for weapons, we're using the Blasphemous Blade because that's going to give you, with the Ash of War, health back whenever you land a hit. And then in our offhand, we're using the Serpent God's Sword, because that also is going to give you health back. I believe it's either for consecutive hits or for killing an enemy. And even though it's in your offhand, you still get the ability. And then for talismans, we're using the God Swaddling Cloth, the Dragon Crest Great Shield, the Golden Dew Talisman, and Taker's Cameo. So the Blessed Dew Talisman is going to give you health back, Taker's Cameo is going to give you health back, I believe for defeating enemies, and then God Swaddling Cloth is for consecutive hits, you're going to gain health back. So we're pretty much using everything in the game that we can to give us health back. Now there's also going to be other things like Great Runes that you can use. I believe Rykard's Great Rune gives you health back for defeating enemies, as well as there are some cracked tears that you can use to gain health back. So if you feel like going a step further, you can always implement those as well. But this build is going to make you pretty much an unstoppable tank. The armor is pretty decent, so you can take a lot of hits. The Ash of War on the Blasphemous Blade is very good as long as you can land it, and it's going to give you a big chunk of health back each time. Now on to the next build. This has to be honestly one of my favorite ones I've ever played. It's basically a Prince of Death assassin, invisible assassin build. It's very fun to play. Now, there's a lot of weapons you can use with this. The armor that I chose to use was the Black Knife armor, so I'm using 3 pieces of it because you have to have at least 3 pieces of the set on to muffle your movements. And then I'm also using the fingerprint helm just because I think it looks pretty swaggy with the Black Knife hood. It kind of, the invisible hood goes over top of it, so it looks pretty cool. And then for talismans, I'm using the Graven Mask Talisman, Godfrey's Icon, the Shard of Alexander, and Millicent's Prothesis. So these are all basically just going to boost my attack power of my abilities. And then for the weapons, there's a lot of choices you can use. My very first weapon that I use is the Glintstone Chris. It has Glintstone Pebble on it, it's intelligence scaling, and this is going to be a mainly intelligence build. Intelligence and dexterity for the most part. And the Glintstone Chris ability is boosted by Godfrey's Icon and the Shard of Alexander, so it's very good. If I want to, I can go dual wield with the daggers, and Millicent's Prothesis will help out a lot with that, as well as dual wield power stancing the daggers is very strong. I'm also using the Crystal Knight dagger because it's also intelligence scaling, so it's a good offhand dagger. And then I have the Prince of Death staff as well on my left hand to cast my sorceries. One of the main ones I use is Unseen Form, so as well as having the muffled movement from the armor, the Unseen Form makes you slightly invisible. The next weapon I have is the Death Ritual Spear. Very, very overpowered weapon. You can basically use the Ash of War to walk through the game. It's extremely overpowered. You basically raise the spear in the air, and all of these magic spears start coming down on the enemy wherever they're at. It's extremely good. It staggers the enemies. It breaks their guard very quick. And you can mix it with attacks like Ancient Death Rancor on the staff. So you can spam Ancient Death Rancor maybe 2 or 3 times, and it'll slowly start going towards the enemies, and then you can start hitting them with the Ash of War on the spear while they're getting hit. It's a huge stagger for the enemies. It helps you literally roll bosses, and it's very good. It does decent physical damage as well, and you can sit decently far back, so you can kind of stay out of harm's way while you use it. Very, very good Ash of War. And then the last weapon that I use is the Family Heads. It's a pretty decent flail weapon that scales with intelligence, so it fits this build quite well. And the Ash of War on it is basically like Ancient Death Rancor. It shoots all of those death skulls at the enemy, so it's a pretty cool weapon to use, and I do like using flails. But this build is going to be mostly to try to stay unseen for the most part by the enemy and sit back and get your hits off. I'm also using Black Knife Tish for a spirit summon because he's very aggro. He gets in there and starts fighting the enemy, and that gives you a chance to sit back, use your Ash of Wars, use your invisibility, use whatever you have to get the kills. He does fit the build pretty nicely as well. But if you guys haven't tried this out, I definitely recommend to give this build a try. It's extremely fun, it looks badass, and it's very, very powerful. As you can see, dual stancing the daggers is very quick and very strong. You can use the invisibility form to literally get by tons of enemies. They just can't see you and they can't hear you because of the armor. And then once you're in the fight, you can summon with Black Knife Tish. He's a red-eyed summon, so he just starts to attack the enemy immediately, so they kind of focus on him. And while he's attacking and you can't be seen, you just sit back and you spam them with the Glintstone Chris's Pebble, which is a really strong attack, especially with boosted with the Shard of Alexander and the Godfrey Icon. Or if you prefer, you can hit them with the Ancient Death Ritual Spear. The Ash of War on that is literally insane, super powerful, and I promise you this build will literally carry you through the game. You're going to want to mostly scale intelligence and dexterity, like I said, but having a good amount of FP and stamina as well so you can keep casting the spells is crucial too. All spells and all Ash of Wars cost stamina to use and rolling, so you're going to want a decent amount of it. As well as FP, I have a ton of FP so I can just sit back and spam this shit without having to have too many flasks of Cerulean Tears. But this build turns bosses even like Malekith into easy mode. And then for my next build, this build is really unique. It's honestly become one of my favorite ones. But I'm basically using the Helfin Steeple sword. It's a really good greatsword that has an Ash of War that buffs it with Ghost Flame. And then I'm also using the Knight's Cavalry armor with the skeletal hood. I think it's a really good combination. It looks really cool. It fits the sword And then in my left hand, I'm using the Godslayer incantation seal, because you're going to use a lot of Black Flame incantations. This is basically a Black Flame Bringer of Death build. For talismans, I'm using the Dragon Crest Great Shield, Phlox Canvas Talisman to boost my incantation damage, Millicent's Prothesis, just for that extra dexterity and extra attack power with consecutive hits, because you're going to be swinging the sword a lot. And then the Bull Ghost Talisman, which is going to give you a lot of extra poise, on top of what the heavy armor already gives you. Now, I also have the Black Knife as my secondary weapon, because if you really get into a bind or you need to sit back and hit an enemy with some ranged attacks, the Ash of War on that is very good. It shoots out Black Flame from a distance, so you can just sit back and hit enemies and not have to worry about getting in the fight too much. The only downside about this build is that you do have to build Intelligence and Faith. The sword, unfortunately, does scale off of Intelligence, so you're going to need Intelligence to do more damage when it's buffed with the Ash of War. And then all of the Black Flame incantations do scale with Faith. So it is a little bit of a downside. I would say this is more of a really late game build, maybe a new game plus 2 or 3 build, because you're going to need a lot of stats to put into Intelligence and Faith. But this build, it looks absolutely fantastic. I love the black armor and the Black Flame. It just looks so good together. And the Health and Steeple Sword is really slept on. It doesn't scale the best in its stats when it's fully leveled up, but it's still just a very, very fun and cool looking sword to use. And this has honestly become one of my favorite builds. And then last but not least, my all-time favorite build right now, it's basically an Erdtree warrior build. So for the armor, you're using the Radiant Gold Mask, and then you're using the Nox armor. You can use, honestly, any one of them. And then you're also using, you know, the Nox Gauntlets and the Nox Greaves. I think it looks very good together with the Gold Mask. And then for weapons, you're going to be using the Sacred Beast Sword that you get from beating the game, as well as the Erdtree Seal, because it's literally one of the best scaling incantation seals. And it's the Erdtree Seal, so I mean, it fits the build. And then for a secondary weapon, you're going to be using Melena's Blade of Calling. For talismans, you're also going to be using the Dragon Crest Great Shield, so that's going to give you some well-needed physical damage negation, since the armor is kind of medium to light armor, so you're going to be struggling a little bit taking hits, but you are going to be a light load with this build, so you're going to be able to roll very well and be very quick. Also, we're using the Shard of Alexander to boost our Ash of Wars. We're using the Phlox Canvas Talisman to also help our Erdtree Seal get more potency with the incantations. And then, of course, we're using the Erdtree's Favor +2 Talisman, because obviously it's the Erdtree build, but it just basically gives you a lot more health, more stamina, and more equipment load to get you up to light load. Now, basically, the main strategy with this is how I do it. I build up to 99 Faith, because everything you're using is scaling off of Faith, basically. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to use incantations like Golden Vow, Protection of the Erdtree, to buff yourself first before you go into the fight. And then you're going to be using incantations like Elden Stars, Wrath of Gold, and then you're going to be just using Ash of Wars. Now, this is a little bit more of a spammy build, to be honest. You can go in and use melee, but honestly, the build isn't really built to be going in and meleeing a ton. As you can see here, I kind of start off by buffing myself, and then we use the Elden Stars to start getting in some passive damage on them from afar. Elden Stars does pretty good damage, and it will stagger a little bit. It doesn't always stagger bosses, but normal enemies cannot withstand it. But once you spam a couple of them off, you can just sit back and hit the Wave of Gold on the dagger. As you can see, I'm absolutely shredding mode with this. And then you can also sit back and use the Wave of Gold on the Sacred Beast Sword. Extremely strong move, and it helps you hit multiple enemies at the same time. So if you're fighting a boss like the Valiant Gargoyles, you can use the Wave of Gold to hit them both at once. But if you're fighting a boss like Moog, you can just use the Blade of Gold to hit him single target. I love how this build looks. I love how it plays. I know people will complain about, oh, it's such a spammy build, but who gives a fuck, honestly. It's extremely fun to play, and it will carry you through the game. So if you want to beat Elden Ring and become the Elden Lord, I highly recommend you give this build a try. It's literally one of my favorite builds. And trust me, I've tried it in the DLC as well, and it will carry you. But if you guys enjoyed this video and you want to see some more cool builds that I've thought up, leave a like down below and leave some comments and tell me what you think, and maybe comment your best build down below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, look out on my channel for some more Elden Ring videos in the future. But this was your boy Cychopsy signing out. I'll see you guys later.